I'm Janae Chan. I teach at Ellahorse School in Pinole, and I'm really discouraged about all of the new charter startups, the ones that are getting left behind in the public schools where all the money is being drained off, and these kids that don't have the support of their parents, who aren't getting pulled into the better charter schools, are going to be left behind with less resources than everybody else. The obligation of the school board members to protect all the kids, not just the kids who are going to take and be taken away and put into the charter schools.
Do you think public money should be going to charter schools?
I do not.
Why not?
Because it takes away from the kids who get left behind in the public schools. That's exactly it. Why are the per student spending on kids in charter schools greater than the kids who get left behind in the public schools? That is ridiculous. Obviously, they have the support of their parents who obviously value education. We need those parents in our public schools. What's left behind makes it all the more difficult to educate kids. There are for-profit companies who are charter school advocates.
I've been a teacher in this district for 8 years. I love teaching, it's my passion. I love the students in the district. I'm a bilingual teacher. I teach English learners every day. And there's no better district than West Contra Costa Unified School District. The only problem is they need to pay their teachers better.
And they say they don't have any money? What's their excuse for not paying you decent wages?
That's a lie. Let me give you an example. One of my top students, she's just a lovely girl. The other day we were doing an art lesson and I asked her, how would you feel without art? And she said, I'd feel like I was dead on the inside. Well, this great girl, guess where she's going? To the charter school next year. I was so devastated. So it's like a brain drain. That's one of the things that the charter schools are doing. I'm not sure if that's what we were really getting at, but they're taking some of the brightest students out of the public schools. And so they're not only taking the brightest students, but they're taking resources, not just students, but money, away from public schools and putting them into what are effectively private schools. They take the students. I don't know how they're able to do it, but they find some of the brightest students in the classroom. And those students, year after year, end up going to charter schools, and we need them in the classroom. And they end up taking public monies away from public education, and they're going into charter schools. Public money should be going to public schools. Public money needs to stay in public schools, because public school teachers are the hardest working teachers out there. We support our students. We stay late. I get to work at 8 a.m. I don't leave until 5. I take work home. I'm lesson planning in my living room. On weekends, I'm lesson planning.
Broad is like people with lots of money who want to get in and dictate educational policy when they don't really have any educational background, but because they have money, they think they should call the shots.
Well, shouldn't they? Shouldn't Bill Gates and these people run things? I mean, don't they know best?
Well, and what it has to do with Martin Luther King is that, for instance, in Oakland, charter schools have served to re-segregate our community.
For a charter school, the students have to be interviewed and the parents have to be interviewed. So the students who have challenges with behavior, they're not going to be accepted. So as this nationwide thing goes on, we're going to be moving more towards third world countries where education will probably be just for the privileged more so than everyone like it is now. I work in West Oakland, Martin Luther King, and we're probably going to be on the next set of schools to be closed and move to the charter. We actually have a very nice facility. It's one of the schools that have been built like in 1970, so it's one of the newer facilities within the school district. And it's in good shape, and it's in an area, our test scores, we struggle with test scores, and everything's measured on test scores.
Many guidelines for the students that they allow into the charter. So for example, I'm a moderate to severe special ed teacher, and not one of my kids could go to a charter school. Not one of them. Compare a charter school that only has a certain population of students. They say that anybody can apply, but not everybody gets to stay. If you don't keep your grades up, if the parents are not able to volunteer so many hours, if you miss one meeting, we take every child. We take every child.
They want to privatize. That's the main corporate agenda. If you look at what's happening in Michigan and all through the Rust Belt, that is the model of which the corporations are trying to achieve their agenda. They have the emergency manager law where they can usurp the powers of all the elected officials by a proxy that's appointed by the governor. They can break union contracts. They can, reduce pensions. They can privatize public resources, public property, and basically gentrify whole communities like what's happening in Benton Harbor there, and drive people that have lived there as part of the community for years so that they can bring other people in that can support the increasingly privatized resources of the public property. You see it here in Oakland where they're trying to privatize public schools. 5 public schools they're looking to make into charter schools. Again, it's an ongoing attack on the working class, and it impacts disproportionately communities of color. They're not shutting schools down in Walnut Creek in Danville, okay? They're not worried about privatizing those schools, but they want to privatize 5 high schools here in Oakland. It's certainly an attack on the working class, and it's an attack on the poor people and people of color, because disproportionately it's affecting our communities.
York, Pennsylvania. The state is planning to hand over the entire school system, to a charter operation from Florida. That's where it's gotten. We're kind of insulated in California, but it's coming hard here because this is the last place where we have really taken a strong stand, and they're falling all across the country, districts are, to the charter movement.
This RFP, what is that all about?
A request for proposal. We think it's putting schools out to bid. It isn't to the highest bidder, it's to the group who can create the most corporate-like plan for a school. Re-Segregate certainly funds a lot of this, the Walton family. Locally, it's the Rogers Foundation that funds a lot of these efforts to privatize schools. This is a whole sea change and paving the way to make it easier for charters to take over district schools. Not just create their own, but actually take over public schools in our district. And this is where we have to draw the line.
What does that mean on Martin Luther King's birthday? You think it's going to create more inequality?
It already has created. We know that charters have created more segregation in the country. We know that Martin Luther King was about equity. There's no equity in education now. We have just turned the milestone. Over 50% of students, public school students in the country, live in poverty. Yes, Martin Luther King would have a lot to say about that.
I think there's an attack on teachers going on. I think it's a concerted effort by financial interests. If anything, I think we just have to look at how the insurance industry has skewed medical care in this country to see what for-profit education in this country would mean. I think the Vergara decision and the profiteers who call themselves education reformers are all part of that. I think they're already benefiting financially. Look at the charter schools, look at the profits the charter schools make, the lack of accountability of the charter schools, and yet the lack of performance when you actually look at what the charter schools are doing. It's going to take them years to figure out that the charter school thing is a sham, but by then, what's left of public education will be in shambles.
They're cherry-picking students. So you have students that are rejected based on test scores, they're rejected whether they have special needs, they're rejected if they're English language learners. And so essentially what we see is a 3-tier system. We have charter schools in more affluent areas. They tend to have more highly qualified credentialed teachers, and they tend to have the students that don't have behavior problems and test well. And then we have the charter schools in the very low income areas, and they tend to be of one ethnicity. And they tend to have teachers that are either very ill prepared or they're not licensed at all. And then we have everyone else, and everyone else is being stripped of funds. The funds are just being stripped. And another report that came out recently, which you may have read about this year, which was in Common Dreams, which was a report that was prepared by Reclaim Our Schools, which involves the teacher unions. It basically said that hundreds of millions of dollars was being wasted in fraud by the charter school sector. Bribery, embezzlement. I mean, the list went on and on and on. And one of the things they talked about was enrollment fraud. A lot of these cyber schools basically had a link and you'd log on, but none of the students were really actually attending. So that's public funds that are going to all this, hundreds of millions of dollars. And according to the report, that's just the tip of the iceberg because of the lack of accountability, because they're public when they want our government funding, but they're private when we ask them to be transparent and information. Then all of a sudden they're private and we don't get to get that information. So this has gone on for 23 years now, and it just created a disaster for the state. We hear about the budget shortfall in public education all the time. Teachers need to get laid off, we need to cut services, and yet there's tons of money for the charter schools that start, for implementation of technology and Common Core, and let's not forget about the testing. The absolute obsession of testing multiple times, even down to kindergarten. It's crazy.
I used to substitute teach in Oakland around 1980. A job I don't recommend to anyone, but that got me into a lot of the different schools there. And this was a time that I was being told that Oakland is the most integrated city in the country, and that I think Lionel Wilson, who happened to be black, was mayor at the time. And what I found, it brought out class differences. So it's not only just racial segregation, but there's a major class issue. And my one anecdote, one of the schools I substituted in was McClymonds High School in West Oakland, which is in the ghetto in West Oakland. And at the time, and it was always striking to me, it seemed like 100% of the students were black, even though the population of Oakland at the time was maybe 35% black. And I subbed in a math class. And in that math class, I'd start the class off, I'd have, say, 25 students, and I had 7 textbooks. And each day, or each period, I would distribute these 7 textbooks to these students, because they didn't have enough textbooks to bring home with them. And how do 7 textbooks serve 25 students at the same time? So that's one experience. The other contrasting experience, I subbed also at Oakland High School. And Oakland High School at that time was predominantly black, but it was more of a middle class school, as far as I could tell. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And I one day substituted in a typing class. This is at the same time. And in the typing class, I was shocked that they had IBM Selectric typewriters. If you typed at the time, that was the creme de la creme of typewriters. I mean, they cost at that time about $1,000 a piece. So here was one class in Oakland has these IBM Selectric typewriters at $1,000 a piece in a more middle class area of Oakland, and then in the poor section of Oakland, they had, they didn't have enough textbooks for the students. So I think there's a big problem with racial segregation in our school system, but there's also class segregation. And I partly see that a lot of the charter school movement is more a private school system for the middle class that can't afford to send their kids to private schools.
Every study clearly states they don't do any better than public schools, and in many instances they do worse related to preparing students for tests, et cetera, et cetera. Secondly, they're very selective related to who they bring into the schools, meaning they want to make sure that students have an aptitude, will be successful. Those who don't pan out are flushed out very quickly. They don't bring in people with disabilities and a variety of other social problems that they have to confront because they don't want to deal with the resources that would entail. From a teacher's point of view, it's non-union. Most of the teachers are young people. Is that normally these teachers don't last more than 3 years, if not 5 years. I know for a fact that it takes a long time to become a master teacher. Okay, I don't know how much confidence, I don't care how much confidence you have and knowledge. There is so much to learn.